We're on page 22. So do you have more pages there?
Yeah.
So give it to the people who came in.
Sorry?
You have more copies of the pages? Today I had 8 that I handed out. But it's 6. Huh?
They are all given.
Okay.
Come, let's sit here.
They seem to have disappeared. Okay. The Rambam on this page is telling us that his principle that human beings get individual providence and animals and other creatures do not, has been influenced by the books of the prophets. Influenced. That's where he took it from. I took it from there. And he starts by saying, you find in the books of the prophets, which includes, now he's quoting from Tillim, from Psalms, that there's an expression of astonishment that God even pays attention to individual people. Certainly, he's not going to pay attention to dogs and cats. And I explained to you yesterday that this astonishment is, I think, relevant only in a limited context. Because, and I gave you an example of the verse from Koheles, from Ecclesiastes, the superiority of man over animals is nothing, 0, because everything is meaningless. And that's certainly not a completely true statement. There's no difference between people and animals? Really? That's a Jewish idea? I think you'll find it very hard to justify that idea from Jewish sources. Now, the standard solution in the book of Ecclesiastes is, he says over and over again, under the sun. All the work that a person does, tachas hashemesh, under the sun. When you put a limitation like that on your comment, it induces the reader to say, aha, so there's a locale called under the sun. He's talking about that locale. That means he's not talking about everywhere. He's only talking about under the sun. Otherwise, don't give you a location marker. Just say that it's true. And that means another locale in which it isn't true. And that's completely correct. This idea that everything is futile, meaningless, vain, empty, is certainly not true over the entirety of the creation. God saw everything that he made and built was very good. And he told Mahod. So he's taking a certain perspective and applying it. That's what I told you yesterday, that with this and this idea, I found elsewhere where you say that, where Rambam says the heavens could have been made for man, because the heavens are superior to man, and therefore you don't make the superior for the sake of the inferior. That's within the lens of under the sun, but not taking everything into account. There's nothing superior to the human soul. That's called Tzelem Elokim. No star is called Tzelem Elokim. No sphere is called Tzelem Elokim. No angel is called Tzelem Elokim. The Rambam didn't forget that verse in Genesis, nor did King Solomon. So there's a purpose in evaluating things in a limited perspective. I came to this not too long ago, and I haven't been able to work out in my mind how to describe the purpose. Under what conditions and what's the purpose of making this kind of comparison. I'm not yet, I don't understand deeply enough to articulate that. But the fact is a fact. I think there's no way of avoiding that. And I tried to explain yesterday that these verses in Psalms are verses which express the point of view of angels. And angels have inherently limited points of view which miss certain features of reality. There are sources in the literature which describe the angels as missing things, not making a mistake about what they do see, but drawing false conclusions on the basis of what they don't see. And that's something which we can then say is the source of their astonishment. And after all, God answers them that I'm not sharing your astonishment. You, the angels, ask why I'm mindful of him, but I am mindful of him. That proves that Hashem is mindful. They're asking, why are you mindful? So you are mindful. So it means that he doesn't agree with their perspective. So I think one mustn't build too much on this type of statement. I think this applies when the Rambam describes in a whole chapter in the guide about can we know the purpose of creation? And that's where he says the heavens weren't made for the sake of man because they're superior to man. And he talks about can you know and can't you know? And some people want to say that you can't know. I think that's only within a certain perspective. Same thing. Okay, so the Rambam, in my heavy print here, means this literally. When the angels say, what is man that you should be mindful of him? They are remarking on a fact. That the fact that the Creator is mindful of man. That you take from their question. Their statement, we do not see why he is worthy of your attention, implies that they do receive his attention. They are asking because it is clear to them that this mindfulness will not apply to cats and dogs. And they do not see the relevant difference between them and humans that justifies mindfulness in their case, in the case of humans. That's why they're asking. So from this, the Rambam brings a proof that God is mindful of individual human beings. That's the bottom line that he wants from it. Now he says, I told you I took this from the scriptural passages, from the books of the prophets. Let's take a look. It is clearly expressed in many scriptural passages that Hashem provides for all men and controls all their deeds. For example, he fashions their hearts alike. He considers all their works. That means everything that every human being does is considered. Your eyes are open upon all the ways of the sons of man, to give every single one, according to his ways. For his eyes are upon the ways of man and sees all his goings of each person of the man. Right? In the law there occur instances of the fact that men are governed by Hashem and their actions are examined by him. For example, in the day when I visit, I shall visit their sin upon them. In other words, they committed crimes. I'm not going to punish them now, but when the time comes, I will then punish them for their crimes. Well, each person commits his own crimes, and each person is going to be accounted for the crimes that he committed. I will even appoint over you a terror. Whoever has sinned against me, whichever one, him I will blot out of my book. That's one by one. Some people yes, and some people no. The same soul I will destroy, the one that does that terrible act, whatever it is. I will set my face against that soul specifically. There are many, many, many verses that say specifically that Baruch Hu treats each individual on the basis of his own record. There are many instances of this kind. All that is mentioned of the history of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a perfect proof that divine providence is to every man individually. Now, this is a little bit of a jump, I think, because from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were very special people. So, to say from the instances that took place with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that shows that it extends to every person individually. I can't validate that logic myself. You could have said very special people get it. That's how I started the book, with the claim that maybe only very special people get this kind of divine attention because they're worthy of it, and other people don't matter. Now it's true that in the events that take place to the patriarchs, there are other people who are visited individually by divine attention. Pharaoh and his whole household get plagues because they take Sarah a prisoner. So it's not just that it happens to him, it happens to other people, but it happens to other people for him. It's still, that itself doesn't, to me, imply that every human being gets individual providence. I don't see how the Rambam gets from this particular reference to that conclusion. So I'm sharing with you my ignorance. The bold print was my words. Again, I think these words show without a doubt that divine providence applies to the details of the lives of all people. The passage alone should suffice to refute the idea that many people are abandoned by the forces of nature, to the forces of nature. As I started the book, maybe only special people get divine providence. Let's say I didn't have the writings of the Rambam, or the Ramban, or anybody else. What are you going to do with these verses? How could you possibly read these verses and say that the vast majority of people don't get divine providence. These are people who are being judged and responded to in terms of their moral and spiritual accomplishments. So it just, to me, these verses alone make the case that I'm trying to make. That doesn't stop some people, but okay. Now, the Rabbi draws the contrast at the bottom of the page. But the condition of individual beings of other living creatures, dogs and cats and the rest, is undoubtedly the same as stated by Aristotle. On that account, it is allowed, even commanded, to kill animals. We are permitted to use them according to our pleasure. And the Rambam is saying something quite significant here. It's not the direct subject of my book, but he's raising a question and giving an answer. What right do we have to slaughter animals? You're killing animals. You're killing them. What right do we have to do that? And he's telling us that the simple idea that they're not human or we're superior to them, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. And I should tell you that there are 2 points of reference here, which I think should be taken into account. One is, what was the situation with respect to animals before the flood? After the flood, God tells Noah, I'm making something new now. You can eat animals. Animals are given to you for food. What was the situation before the flood? There are 2 views, not just obvious. One view is that before the flood, everyone was vegetarians. You couldn't eat the animals. That's one view. But there's another view that you couldn't kill animals for food. You couldn't kill them. If they died spontaneously, you could eat them. Before the flood, no prohibition against eating animals that spontaneously die. And there are even midrashim that in the Garden of Eden, angels roasted steaks, prime rib, for Adam and Chava. And that's not vegetarian. Well, it wasn't the new, plant-grown, lab-grown meat, which probably is meat anyway, because you have to start with certain cells out of which you grow it. Those cells aren't made of soy. And then what happened with Noah is that you got permission to kill animals for food. So then the emphasis is on the killing. What you're prohibited to do before is kill animals. My Rabbi Zatzal pointed out something we had a couple of weeks ago in the Parsha. Let's say you make an animal into a sacrifice. You sanctify it to be used as a sacrifice. Well, then, of course, the rule is take it into the temple and you sacrifice it in the courtyard and you go through the appropriate procedure. Suppose somebody slaughters it outside the temple. So it's called shofech damim, spilling blood. That's quite a dramatic remark. The blood of the cow is blood and you're spilling blood. My Rabbi said that that's the same word we use for someone who kills people. It's telling you that the life of an animal should not be taken for granted. People who do slaughtering for us are people who are learned and should be on a certain spiritual level, because it's not a trivial thing to kill an animal. So the Rambam is asking, what is it about animals that give us this permission slip intellectually now, not in terms of common morality? And his answer is because from the point of view of the purpose, this is my way of putting it throughout the book, right? From the point of view of the purpose of divine providence, there's no difference between this animal and that animal. The fact that this animal lives and that animal dies doesn't serve any divine purpose. What divine purpose will want to have animals of certain groups, the groups should be preserved. But that can be preserved by preserving this one rather than that one. Which fly the fish catches and eats doesn't matter. There need to be flies and there need to be fish, but which one doesn't matter. That being the case, there's no particular value in the life of this animal. Remember, I'm talking now about just killing. I'm not talking about pain. Pain is something else, a separate issue. I think he's going to come to it. But that the animal should continue to live or shouldn't continue to live, there's no intrinsic value in that. And that being the case, that's why we're permitted to kill him. Otherwise, we wouldn't be permitted to kill him. Yeah.
Can I go back on a point where you learned?
Yeah.
Maybe the Rambam addresses this. Does God judge us based on our future capabilities or just on our accomplishments?
Well, okay, you sort of switched you switched two things. You switched future for past, and you switched capabilities for accomplishments.
Right.
Yeah, but that's a double switch. You have to be very careful about that. You didn't say past accomplishments versus future accomplishments. You said past accomplishments versus future abilities. Not quite clear what point you're trying to make. That's what I thought you meant. Okay, that's why I'm picking on the vocabulary. Well, I'm very picky about vocabulary. That's true. That's the way I was brought up. So now, when he's talking about justice, justice applies only to the past. Justice is what you have done, and what you get is related to what you have done. Every pleasure is a result of a past mitzvah you did. Every pain is a result of a past transgression that you committed. It's not on the basis of the future. We don't judge on the basis of the future. We don't judge on the basis of the future. Shmuel is crying, and he's dying of thirst, right? When Abraham kicks him out of their domicile. And God hears Shmuel crying and wants to save him. The angels say to him, if you save him, his descendants are going to persecute Jews in the future. And the answer is God sees him b'asher hu sham, in his present condition, not on the basis of the future. And the Marsha Esau ben Sarah Moher, who know that, and that's prevention. That's not judgment. Okay. So that's what the Rambam says here. Why is it appropriate to slaughter animals? Because the intellectual power provided by the Creator does not relate to them as it does to people. So to speak, that power sees in people an image of itself. This is what I told you yesterday. When the intellectual power of God that runs the world looks around, so to speak, around the world, in human beings it sees, that's me. That's my image. They too possess intellect. The result is that the providential provision of reward and punishment applies to them because they are an image of that element in divine providence. Put it together? Okay. Next page, 23. Notice that he does not explain the appropriateness of slaughtering animals on the grounds of their intrinsic inferiority or worthlessness. Rather, he explains it on the grounds of the difference in their relationship to the Creator. For example, you might say, if it's a question of value or disvalue, what then about people who have their different relative value? Maybe there are some people who have such little value that you can slaughter them also. Not using that. It's a question of whether the divine power that runs the world relates to them as an image of itself or not. That's why you can slaughter them. Okay, now the Rabbi goes on. That's one half of his view, that individual people get individual divine providence. The other half of his view is that other creatures don't. The view that other living beings are governed only by divine providence in the way described by Aristotle. Now, here, if you're paying attention, you're thinking the alarm bell should start ringing. Wait a minute, I thought they were abandoned according to Aristotle. What do you mean? Are only governed by divine providence in the way described by Aristotle? According to Aristotle, it's mikra, it's just chance. There's no providence applying to them. He wants to say that there is, but the outcome is the same outcome that Aristotle sees. He's not explaining it correctly. And this is supported by the prophets. Watch these words. Prophet Habakkuk. When he perceived the victories of Nebuchadnezzar, and so the multitude of those slain by him, Nebuchadnezzar is conducting his campaigns and slaughtering people wholesale. He said, O Hashem, it is as if men were abandoned, neglected, and unprotected, like fish and like the worms of the earth. What do those words tell you?
More like animals.
As his purpose is out of the picture.
First of all, what does it tell you about worms and fish?
That they
They're abandoned. And then
They're abandoned, right? And now he says, Nebuchadnezzar slaughtering massively. It's as if people were like worms and fish, which of course they aren't. It just looks that way. But that shows you the gigantic gulf between people on the one hand and worms and fish on the other. Worms and fish are really abandoned. And this wanton wholesale slaughter makes it look like people are being treated like worms and fish, even though they aren't, because they're only treated by justice. But it looks like it. That verse alone is pretty rich. It really says the whole story, right? That's exactly what the Rambam wanted. He thus shows that these classes are abandoned, says the Rambam. This is expressed in the following passage again, and makes men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. They take them all up with the angle. I mean, that's a fishing thing, right? They're treated as if that were so, but the prophet then declares that such is not the case. This is what it looks like. When Nebuchadnezzar is on the rampage, that's what it looks like, but it's not so. For the events referred to are not the result of abandonment, forsaking, and absence of providence, but are intended as a punishment for the people who well deserved all that befell them. So again, I point out here, the absence of divine providence means only absence of specific divine purpose, not absence of divine causation. That's where he would disagree with Aristotle. He would disagree with Aristotle that nothing, there's no cause, there's no power, no structure, no order that causes these things to happen. That's not true. But it serves no purpose that should happen this way rather than that way. No intrinsic value, and therefore it would have been just as good if it had happened differently. If it happened a different time, a different way, that's what happens with the animals.
So, you probably addressed this, and excuse me, I apologize if I'm incorrect, but be aware of divine providence. So some people may not be aware of the kind of connections or the kind of, they may not understand how this is caused by divine providence because of a limited understanding of things. I mean,
well, I think that's a very common intellectual position to be in. A lot of science is dedicated to trying to explain how and why things happen after we know they happen.
Right.
We know very well they happen by observation. We don't know how and why they happen. So a person doesn't deny that something happens on the grounds that he can't explain it. That's not a good intellectual.
To appreciate the story of Joseph as an example, in a kind of superficial, brothers don't understand the kind of, at least as the story kind of elaborates, the story that they don't understand the kind of role of kind of Hashem and kind of guiding the events here as it transpires. But as the reader and interpreter Joseph kind of sees the underlying connections, he has a higher understanding of the kind of connections of this. This is alluding to a kind of people are endowed with a kind of higher state of awareness.
I'm not following you with respect to Joseph. First of all, the brothers are clear that divine providence runs everything. They say when Joseph in Egypt, in disguise, attacks them, we know why this is happening because of what we did to Joseph. And when they find the money in the sacks, they say, what is this that God did for us? We're guilty and we don't deserve rewards. They attribute everything to divine providence. You may not know what divine providence wants in a particular case,
right.
but that doesn't mean you don't understand the concept of divine providence and you don't believe in it. There can be puzzles in any field. It doesn't mean you don't have the fundamentals.
Okay.
Number one. And number two, they thought they had adequate cause for attacking him.
Right.
Because he thought he had done criminal acts. And there's a proof for that in the text also, because when they say we're guilty for what we did, I don't know if I didn't see this in the commentaries, so I found it myself, but I think it's very clear. They say, what do they say? We're guilty because When he pleaded with us for mercy, we didn't listen to him. We're not guilty because we accused him of crimes that he didn't commit. We're not guilty because our judgment was unjust, but he asked for mercy. And he said, brother, we should have given him mercy, which means they still believed that what they did with him was right, was perfectly justifiable. But mercy, we should have shown mercy. So they obviously had a clear understanding of what they were doing, and they thought that what they were doing was right. So it's, I would not paint them as primitive. As far as the reader is concerned, well, it depends on how many times you've read it. You know, if you know the end of the story, then you can say. But if you're reading for the first time, you wouldn't know any more than they did.
Right.
So I don't hear the contrast of levels or the contrast of populations or contrast of ignorance. I don't hear it. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking with Purim, and when there is a decree, then we learn in Purim that a decree that has been done by the king, so to speak, of course, it's Ahasuerus and so on, but it cannot be removed. It's already been sent, and it can't be taken away. But there can be a different decree that perhaps could work in between the scenario. So I'm thinking like.
Not quite sure what you mean.
As if the future, like once a decree has been done, certain outcome is kind of tending to happen, but yet in the in-between, there's still gaps for decrees that could.
It depends upon what kind of intervening event you envision. The Rambam himself quotes elsewhere. The pasuk says, "Hashem is where it's b'chol karenu alav." Whenever we call out to Him. And he distinguishes between the community versus the individual. An individual can have a decree sealed against him, which he can't overturn. But a decree on the community can always be overturned. So I don't know exactly what you're referring to, under what conditions you're referring to it. The community makes indeed, it's more than that, because even a prophecy of something, of a punishment, let's say, a prophecy, I'm telling you something very fundamental now. If you like, I can take a half hour to justify it, but you have to know the fact. A prophecy of a punishment is only a warning. It is not a prediction that something will happen. It's only a warning. And the Rambam says this explicitly in the beginning of his commentary in the Mishnah, and he proves it from verses in Jeremiah. Because when the Babylonians are at the gates, and they're going to conquer and destroy the temple and put everything in exile. Jeremiah is saying the Babylonians are going to win the war and destroy the temple. And there were false prophets who were saying that no, God won't let his house be destroyed. God will protect it, nothing will happen. And Jeremiah confronts them and he says, you and I are not on a par. Because if what I say comes true, if what I say comes true, that proves you're false prophets. But if what you say comes true, it doesn't prove that I'm a false prophet. Why? Why is there asymmetry? Because you're predicting something good. When the prediction is something good, it has to happen. That's a prediction. I'm prophesying there'll be a disaster. That's only a warning. God can change his mind. He can delay it, take it out in other ways. He can show mercy. So if you're right and everything goes well, that doesn't prove I'm a false prophet, because my prophecy is only the form of a warning. But if my prophecy comes true, then you're a false prophet because you said something good is going to happen. That's a prediction. So that's built into the very nature of prophecy. There are other distinctions as well, but that's a very important distinction to be understood. Yeah.
If everything is ultimately for the good, how does one distinguish between a good prophecy for good and a prophecy that prophesies something bad?
Your words, which are very good, right, give you the answer. You said it yourself. Because you said if everything is for the good.
Ultimately for the good.
Yeah, ultimately for the good. Those words leave open that when it happens, it's bad. It's only for the good. It's not good. It's for the good. It will lead to the good. Like surgery, right? It would be much better not to have the problem than to have the problem, have surgery and solve the problem.
How can one tell?
Oh, how can you tell? Now we're going from question to question. Okay, now I think there's an unlimited number of questions that could be asked. But that's the distinction between good on the one hand and for the good on the other hand is a crucial distinction. Nochem ish gamzu. We say gamzu l'tova. That's how you sort of accept things that happen to you which are painful, right? And people forget the lamed. He didn't say gamzu tova, this too is good. He said gamzu litova, this too is for good. Or Rabbi Kiva was his student. Everything that God does is letav, for good, not good. That's the whole thing. I have a whole shir on the reality of evil from our point of view. Even that God creates evil. You say, wow, Rabbi, how could you say such a thing? Well, I'm just quoting Isaiah. Is that all right? All right. Yotze or v'arei chashich, osa shalom uvarei ra. That's how the pasuk ends. In your friendly siddur, it says akol, to sort of soften the blow, not have to confront in the morning. God creates ra, but it says so. And it says that the Baruch Hu created the Yetzer Hara, and the Talmudic comment is, afilu yotzro kro ra. Even its creator called it evil. So of course, Baruch Hu creates evil, but it's evil, as you said, for good. How can you tell what's going on? That's very difficult. I agree with it's very difficult. Okay. So now he quotes in the middle of the page, the Rambam. He says that they have this false picture of Habakkuk paints of the appearance of what's going on in Nebuchadnezzar is false. He says, Lord, you have ordained them for judgment, and Hashem to establish them for correction. Everything is according to justice. What looks to you like random, wanton slaughter is not such. Now the Rambam considers a possible objection. Our opinion is not contradicted by scriptural passages like the following. He gives to the beast his food, no saint, lebehema. Young lions roar after their prey and seek their meat from Hashem. And then, what you say in Ashrei every day, 3 times, you open your hand to satisfy the desire of every living thing. Doesn't it sound like if he's providing food for the animals, that he must be providing for individual animals food? Doesn't it sound like, therefore, he does take into account of each animal and each one's diet and appetite and needs? Now, as I write in the heavy print, that sounds as though he's giving food to each animal individually. And you might understand this as animals receiving same kind of divine providence that people receive individual providence. And similarly, there's more passages that the Rambam has to worry about. Those were verses. Now what about the saying of the sages? He sits and feeds all, from the horns of the unicorns even to the eggs of insects. He feeds them, machil. He provides them with food from the greatest to the tiniest. There are many similar sayings extant in the writings of our sages. So you have it both in what's called the written tradition and the oral tradition. But they imply nothing that is contrary to my view. Okay, so he says, how does he explain it? All these passages refer to providence in relation to species, not providence in relation to individual animals. Now here we have to be very careful. I don't remember whether I wrote this in the thing I have to say verbally. First of all, I should really put a footnote in here. The word species is dangerous. If you say species and they think of Darwin and they think of evolution, they don't know that there are 10 different definitions of species which are used fortuitously in each context differently, some pick when they need it, and there's no unifying path. Okay, that's a little vagary in evolution. But the word species is a modern word, and it's associated with a certain scientific tradition and nothing to do with the word in Arabic or in Hebrew, min, which means type or category, has no connection whatsoever to the modern biological concept of species. And therefore there is no commitment in our sources that species will never disappear. This is one of the things that they use to prove that the Torah must be wrong, because species have gone extinct. Now realizes the word species isn't our word. Rashi in Chumash says explicitly, you can have creatures of the same min that don't look the same and don't behave the same. And it's still the same min. So it should be, there's a care to preserve categories. Like we saw in the first passage in the Ramban when we started. This is where the Ramban was a student of the Rambam. And although he disagreed with him vociferously on occasion, he took a great deal from him. This is only for species, not providence in addition to individual animals. Now I write, here we need to be very careful. The difference between people and animals is that divine providence applies to people individually and to animals only collectively. We need to ask, which aspect of providence is he referring to? Causation and control, is that where the difference is? Or purpose? Now, you should know from all what we said before, the answer is the purpose, not causation and control. The Rambam holds that all causation is only for individuals. This is the proof of it now. He rejects the existence of groups and categories outside the mind altogether. For that reason, causation does not apply to them. So the distinction between people and animals concerns only the purpose of providential care. In the case of the animal, the purpose is only the preservation of animals of that kind. Individuals, animals, circumstances have no divine concern. For people, the circumstances of each person is a matter of divine concern. In other words, this was a famous debate in the medieval times, what came to be called nominalism versus realism, whether in addition to concrete objects, there are other types of real, external, objective things which perform the purpose of either identifying them or grouping them. So you can have groups or you can have qualities. The color red, not that red in that canister there, and not this white of the table, but David Hume's famous missing shade of blue. David Hume imagined the following project. I mean, you could imagine it today too. Cataloging all the colors there are in the world. And of course, you can make them into a chart where you have smoothly developing hues of color, right? And you go insects and animals and the sky and the sea and everything. And you're just taking these shades and putting them into the chart. And you canvas everything in the world. And now you've got a complete picture of all the colors in the world. And you see smooth gradations from color to color. The two adjacent colors are almost exactly alike, except in one spot. In one spot, there seems to be, a gap, an easily visible gap. What? But, there must be a shade that's a little lighter than this one, a little darker than that one, which belongs in between, because it's not as smooth here. I can even imagine what it would look like. Come on, guys, look more carefully. Find one that has that color. And they go looking and looking and looking. Zero, nothing comes up. I say, well, look at that. In our world, there's a missing shade of blue. Okay, you understood the story? Not too difficult, hey? What is it that's missing? Is the thing that's missing real? A thing that's missing? Well, if you think colors are real, whether or not there are things that have the colors, then you're okay. What I said makes perfectly good sense. It's missing because there's nothing in the world that has that color. So all the other colors are represented in our world, and this color isn't represented in our world. And I'm thinking of the scope of colors in our world. If you don't think there are colors, then you have to retranslate everything I said in a different vocabulary. It can be done, but that's what you have to do if you don't think that there are really colors. Now, what about species? According to Darwin, his famous book was called Origin of Species. So the idea is evolution has to account for new species, not thing to thing, but species coming into existence. So you see the course of evolution, on one level anyway, as species. This many, then more species, then less species, species becoming extinct, new species coming into existence. How do new species come into existence? That sounds like you're talking, as on the one hand you're talking about ants, and the other hand you're talking about elephants. They're just different kinds of things, and they come into existence. You have to explain where they come from, and so forth and so on. Is a species a thing above and beyond all the creatures in the species? We're not talking about the evolution of dogs. We're talking about the evolution of the species of dogs. And then we catch this. If you have meta selection, meta evolution, so then you have a different procedure altogether for the evolution of species than you have for the evolution of individuals. So then you're treating species as if, in addition to the flesh and blood organisms running around, There are in the world things called species, and you have to explain them also. They're separately that need an explanation. The Rambam is against that, hammer and tongue. The whole speech, the whole way of thinking, he's against 100%. He's a nominalist. Categories, properties, qualities are in the mind. They're only in the mind. They're not in the world. So a species is just a way you have of thinking about creatures in certain respects, under certain conditions. That's all. Okay, now we're talking about divine providence. Providence is how God runs the world. Well, what's in the world to be run? Only individual objects. There are only individual cats, only individual dogs, only individual osprey. So how do you make sure that the species is preserved if all you can act on is individual dogs and cats? The answer is you've got to act on individual dogs and cats in such a way that this type of creature, the type doesn't go extinct. You have to set it up by setting up conditions that act on individuals, that preserve certain types of individuals in the world. There's no way to act on the type. You can only act on the individuals. That's the Rambam's position. So it can't be that there's a difference between causation and control for people and causation and control for cats. The only way a Kodesh Baruch Hu can guarantee that there will always be cats is by operating on individual cats. You've got to set up a system that does things to individual cats. So then the difference between human beings and animals is not the causation and control, the difference is the purpose. In the case of a human being, the purpose for which the providence is applied to the human being is to give him what is appropriate for his personal record, individually. And if you switch it from him to somebody else, it will be an injustice and something which cannot be done. But when you talk about what happens with an individual dog, there you say the purpose of engineering the world to operate on this dog is only that there should be dogs. So then it could operate so that this dog lives 7 years and this dog lives 3 years, or vice versa. It wouldn't make any difference. Either way, you got one dog that lived a short life and the other dog lived a longer life. From the point of view of the species, it won't make any difference. But the access to preserving the species is only through individuals. So therefore, the control, the causation and control on all levels has to be the same. It's one of the proofs to the thesis that I've been saying the whole way through. And Rambam says individual providence only applies to human beings. It means there's a specific purpose in something happening to each individual person, whereas there isn't that type of purpose in something happening to an individual other type of creature. Okay, so this functions as a review, as you see. Okay, now, this is how the Rambam summarizes the middle of 24. The acts of Hashem are, as it were, enumerated. That's what the verses are talking about. That's what the statements from the Talmud are talking about. How he provides for every species the necessary food and the means of subsistence. This is clear and plain. Aristotle likewise holds that this kind of providence is necessary and is in actual existence. This Aristotle agrees to because otherwise the species would go out of existence. If it was really chance, then things, just like individual dogs live and die, individual trees live and die, so species also could live and die. To keep it constant over thousands of years, remember, nature is that which happens all the time or almost all the time. Well, in their history and their observation, either species or categories don't cease to exist. They're there continuously. Alexander, who was a medieval interpreter and expositor of Aristotle, for whom the Rambam has considerable respect, not Jewish, also notices this fact in the name of Aristotle, that the species or the type has its nourishment prepared for its individual members. Otherwise, the species would undoubtedly have perished. It does not require much consideration to understand this. We have the food chain and all the rest. So, as we said above, the natural system which enables categories of animals, here I use a better word, categories, to survive is the result of divine causation, but which particular animals survive is not relevant to the divine purpose. Yes, the system as divinely created causes particular animals to survive, and God knows that because his foreknowledge enabled him to anticipate it and to predict that it would be so. But from the point of view of divine purpose, which particular animals survive is merely chance. Now, I've thought about this for many years, and I can't get to a conclusion. Is it conceivable that every detail of the world carries its own divine purpose? Every detail of the world, every event and every detail. Here's a little example. Take a Sefer Torah scroll, right? Okay, approximately 300,000 plus letters. Take the distance between any two letters. Any pair of letters, 300,000 squared, right? Each distance, each one of them serves a different purpose. That this letter and this letter are this distance apart, that has a certain significance. If we're different, it would make a difference to the world, difference to mankind. You can multiply facts infinitely, really. So I have two feelings. First of all, it seems to me at a certain point you run out of significance. On the other hand, you have an infinite divine mind. It's not that it can't hold the information. No problem with storage, the hard drive isn't limited. But it seems to me that my intuition is there's got to be a contradiction there somewhere, that everything should make it. I can't derive the contradiction. I can't satisfy it the other way. But what the Rabbi is saying here about, he's saying specifically that it makes no difference whether this fly gets eaten or that fly gets eaten. There could be cases that are different. There could be. But there'll be, because general rules usually have exceptions. The Gemara tells a story of a farmer who was worthy of a great reward, and at a certain point his cow's leg broke, so he stopped to treat the cow and was rummaging around, and he saw a piece of metal sticking out of the ground, and he dug up and he found a pot of gold. So clearly the cow's leg broke there so as to enable him to find the pot of gold. So is that individual providence on an individual cow? Yeah, it is. It's not that it can't happen in certain circumstances, and especially when it's for the sake of the providence on the person that he should get what he deserves. But it's not a general rule, and God runs the world for animals in this way of causation for the sake of the species or the category, not causation for the sake of the circumstances or career of the individual animal. Yeah.
Does providence ever happen to animals for the sake of the animal?
No, it can't be, because animals have no intrinsic value. I'll tell you one thing, then I'm going to quit for today. There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, and it's a wonderful Maharal. You, of course, have to be selective with whom you share these things, whether they have the intellectual and spiritual preparation for these things. The Mishnah says to witnesses in a capital case, be careful. Be careful. You're giving testimony that could result in the death of a human being. And one thing you're supposed to tell the witnesses is, just like Adam was created and said, for my sake the world was created, so every person is required to say, for my sake the world was created. And that's who you're going after, someone for whom the world was created. So Maharal asked the obvious question, when you're the only person in the world, then you could say, my world, my sake the world was created. Right? Aren't these people clever? I'm sure some in the university thought, how silly the Mishnah is. Doesn't the Mishnah realize? Because they didn't read the Maharal. But when there are millions of people or billions of people, how could you say that? Says the Maharal. You're missing the point. The point is this. Imagine the world, the creation as we have it, the creation story, before Adam is created. Before Adam is created, what is it worth? What's its value? Zero. There's no worth and no value. Not the exquisite geometry of the compound eye of the fly. When I put a person in it, and there's a spiritual drama that gives it worth, it confers meaning and significance on the whole creation. That's why it's created for the sake of man, because it's the context in which his spiritual story gets played out. Okay, so now this is the Maharal. B'shvili nivra olam means I'm the kind of creature who, all by myself, all alone, could justify a whole creation. Imagine a creation with no people and just put me in. Just me! It transforms the entire creation into something of value. And you tell the witnesses, that's who you're giving evidence against. A creature who could justify a whole creation all by himself. That's what it means. So that's why we wouldn't say that you were doing it for the sake of the animal. The animal has no purpose unto itself whatsoever. And then you have this, where you must have heard it recently, you'll hear it coming up to Shavuos now. Yom HaShishi, the sixth day, we say in Kiddush Friday night. The sixth day. None of the other days have a high idea. Have a the. What's the hey doing there? So one explanation is the 6th of Sivan, when they received the Torah, the whole world is created for the sake of that day. If the Jews received the Torah that day, then the creation is justified, and if not, it goes back to Tohu Vavohu, formlessness and void. The whole thing gets undone. Without us receiving the Torah, it's worthless. That's the idea here. Okay.